Welcome on board the Richplanet starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this is Ulysses. Last week I went down to the surface of Earth and gave a talk at the Bridge Hotel pub in Newcastle upon Tyne. In the talk I spoke about how mainstream media manipulation works, and also about the very disturbing phenomenon of animal mutilation. I presented evidence of a UK government cover-up about animal mutilation. On today's show, I will be screening the discussion which took place after the talk. To give some background to the questions posed by the audience, here is a brief snapshot of what I spoke about. A group called the APFU, that's the Animal Pathology Field Unit in the UK, have been investigating cases of dead animals turning up with surgical procedures having been carried out on their bodies. Usually internal organs are excised from small holes. Blood is removed and often a strip is taken from the animal's jaw, leaving the bone very clean of flesh and tissue. No individual has ever been seen or caught carrying out these attacks, which are happening all over the world. One theory about the incidents is that extraterrestrials are the perpetrators. In Colorado, researcher Chuck Zukowski has investigated 6 cow mutilation cases. In one case, which exhibited the classic jaw strip, he examined the cow quite soon after it had been mutilated. He recorded residual electromagnetic field on the side of the head which suffered the jaw strip. He concluded, therefore, that there must have been some kind of electromagnetic object, perhaps a tracking device, implanted in the animal's jaw, which had been removed during the mutilation procedure. So, you've just heard me give 2 talks, one about what I've termed the information war and animal mutilation. Is there anyone who has a question? Yes.
You just mentioned the Disclosure Project there. I was at the press conference in 2001.
You were?
I was there, yeah.
Right.
And one thing I noticed was the lack of, you're talking about the media, you know, the information war, was about the lack of coverage in this country.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I saw it, well, actually, the BBC did report it once. I got it on camera on News 24. But the press conference a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago or something.
Yeah, Washington DC. Yeah.
The difference in the coverage in this country was quite.
Yeah, I agree. If you compare,
why do you think
I don't
that
know. It's just very recently the coverage. I mentioned the Daily Mail. They covered that press conference, and there wasn't one Mickey take in that. So. I don't know. I don't know what the motive behind that would be, but the Disclosure Project, I wasn't aware of it when you said. You know, the people who were involved in the Disclosure Project, apparently they all thought they were going to be famous. The 22 people who spoke on that day, they thought the world was going to change in May 2001, and they thought it was going to be massive. They thought they were going to be on the front page of every national newspaper when they had that conference. This was, for those who don't know, the Disclosure Project, it was insiders speaking about their involvement in UFO and ET programs, and it was at the Washington Press Club 2001, and the information was phenomenal. And the press, I can't remember it being on TV in the UK at that time.
It was 3 o'clock in the morning, News 24. I've got on tape.
Any other questions?
In regards to the mutilations.
So just wait for the mic to come.
Right.
Yeah. Alice? Just stand in front. Yeah, you can walk, you can move. Oh, sorry, it's Dave. I'll come to you next. It's the next guy. I'll cut that out, right?
You can edit that one.
Right.
Do you think that using the animals for incubating some kind of biological weapon to be used against humans, or do you think they're doing something extra to genetically alter humans long term?
Is that on the assumption that it is extraterrestrials doing it?
Yes, on the assumption.
What are they? If it is extraterrestrial, what is there? There's no way I could know that. I have had a lot of correspondence from a guy in the States called Dr. Philip Duke, and he's convinced that not in all cases, but in some cases, they're growing HIV antibodies. That for some reason they need those antibodies. He's absolutely convinced, and he has had is house raided. He wrote a book called The AIDS ET Connection. He believes that HIV was put here by extraterrestrials. And it might sound an outlandish claim, but when you actually learn about HIV and how it suddenly appeared like that in 3 different parts of the world, and each of the 3 strains of HIV are different, and none of them could have evolved from each other, and they all appeared simultaneously. This is one thing that you wouldn't hear, oh, it came from monkeys. I think that's bollocks. But he thinks that the mutilation phenomenon is that it's HIV that they're trying to grow, but I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, I was going to bring up our friend John Lear and the war on information. Yes. Now, regarding these characters that are put out into the public forefront and like give information on UFOs and stuff, regarding the Illuminati, one of their tactics apparently is to put something at the start of a sentence, put something at the end of a sentence, and mix it all up in between with loads of disinformation. Yes. Now, regarding my friend John Lear, how plausible do you think what he was saying is on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being complete bullshit, 10 being
5.
completely plausible.
5. I'd say 5.
5.
And I'm not sitting on the fence by saying
okay.
that, by the way. I have a lot of people who know him say he does have a tendency to exaggerate his claims. But I think there is a lot of truth behind some of them.
Because regarding his history with the CIA and other government agencies, it seems a bit disjointed in my eyes that he'd come out and just blurt out everything without putting himself in some kind of danger. Yeah, I think the way he puts himself over, he's probably got access to less information than people think. Yeah, and then the Project Camelot fella, Bill, forget his name, but I emailed him and he said Bill Ryan. Henry Deacon was looking at his thing, saying, oh, well, he agreed with everything, but he didn't agree with kind of the Twin Towers philosophy. You see, this is the problem with this field. Henry Deacon, not sure about him. It's full of all of these people, and it's a case of trying to figure out who's genuine and who isn't, and and for me, there is by far enough people who are genuine to say that it's true at its core. It's just that, as you say, the authorities put out some of these people and they'll talk about that at the beginning and that at the end, and it's rubbish in the middle. So Andrew Johnson calls it the UFO muddle up, not the UFO cover up. It's the muddle up, because they put information. Yeah, it's picking out the true from the false. Okay. Anyone else?
Your suggestion that the cattle mutilations have been used to, possibly used to incubate something. Were you suggesting that that was being done by aliens or covertly by government?
I would say if it's being used for that purpose, I would say it's most likely being done by another non-human intelligence, an extraterrestrial. Because if the government was doing it, they could just buy as many animals as they want, do it in private. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Is there a possibility that government agencies are involved in with the aliens? Now we hear lots coming from America that the secret government is involved with the aliens.
Well, the higher up you go, the less transparency there is. So it becomes impossible to work out. I would say it's a possibility. It's definitely a possibility that there is communication with certain groups. And if you believe all of the theories, then there are more than one group of extraterrestrial. Any others?
Sure. Just regarding the mutilations, is there any common sort of like denominations you mentioned hotspots. There's areas that seem to be targeted. Is there any reasoning behind that, or is there, with regard to the humans, is there any sort of common, or are they completely random?
Well, the thing with the human ones, there's probably not enough data to make a guess. You're talking a handful of cases. But the animals, I've got a theory on that, but it's just a pure guess. Right? If you look at the Devon case, right, you've got within 1/4 square mile, you've got 18 cases with 50 odd animals spread over sort of 5 or 6 years. And on one case, the animal was mutilated like 2 miles away from that farm, but it was deposited where in that quarter square mile, right? So I'm thinking there's something significant about that square mile, and the only thing I can think of is that there's something under the ground, under that quarter square mile, that perhaps when they're, and this is pure speculation, I'm not saying this is true, it's trying to make sense of the evidence that when they're mutilating that animal, there's a piece of complementary technology under the ground, maybe a mile beneath the ground, that it's working in tandem with it. Yeah, or radiation, whatever. But they've got something under the ground, which is why there could be hotspots. Now that's just me trying to figure out the evidence.
It would key in with the idea that, you know, these are microchipped and then targeted later. Then, you know, they're targeting a certain population in an area that they've singled out for microchipping.
Yeah.
If that's the case with a jaw strip.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Now, I spoke to Colin Andrews about this, and he's an American. Well, he's not American. He's British, but he lives in America. And he said, yeah, I see your point. He said that the alien technology always uses triangles. There's always 3 points to it. So maybe that's significant. But I mentioned St. Bride's Bay. UFOs have been seen coming out there, so maybe they are involved with the cases in Wales, and perhaps they're going down, and there's something under the ground there. So they send a scout craft out, and there's something underneath, which is how the technology works. But that's just speculation, like I say. So that could be why there are hotspots. But David Caton, the RAF guy, who you saw in the video, I've discussed this with him, and he doesn't agree with me. He says, well,
It can't be random if it's hotspots, can it?
yeah, he says, well, Richard, there are cases that have been all over the UK, like one there, one there, one there, but there are hotspots. So, don't know. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the movie or the DVD Silent Killers refers to a particular case, I can't remember where, possibly Wales, where a whole head of stock is locked up for the night.
Yeah.
And it's that stock
Disappears.
just disappears.
Yeah.
And it goes into great description of if humans had come in and they would have had to bring a big articulated truck or whatever, and it just basically pours a whole lot of scorn onto that. Has there been any more news on that particular case? Or
No, I mean, the one you're talking about, there were 3 separate incidents on the same farm, and I think in total there was something like over 1,200 sheep just went completely missing. And the farm is on the end of a narrow track, and the wagon, apparently there was a sheepdog in the building nearby, it didn't even bark. All these sheep had gone, and the shepherd checked the sheep at like late in the evening. He came back in the morning, they were all gone. And he said, if you load 450 sheep onto a wagon, they make a hell of a noise, they shit all over the yard. When they're getting into the trucks, it was clean as a whistle, and they were all gone.
there's been no comeback on that particular case or since then?
And the farmer said it was as if they'd been winched up. And there's more, in total, there's over 1,200 sheep at that farm, and the insurance company wouldn't even insure them. So,
I was just wondering if the hotspots you're talking about are anything to do with so-called ley lines, with the magnetic lines patterned across the Earth. Question 1, and question 2. In the papers recently, the last couple of days, I mean mainstream media like The Sun, there was reports of unknown lights that shut down the Chinese airfield for 3 days continually. What are your thoughts on that? Secondly,
ley lines, I haven't done any research on ley lines at all. I do occasionally hear people talk about it, so that question I can't give you an answer. Yes, you're right, the Chinese did close down an airport, which was covered a little bit in our media, and there was, as always there is in these cases, an explanation,
and I wonder why
which was that it was a military test of some kind. But there's been more than one occasion of Chinese airports being shut down. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, it does seem strange that like the chap here said, that conference in Washington DC was covered quite honestly.
and received no coverage yet. All of a sudden, they're saying that happened in.
Yeah, I mean, Werner von Braun, who was one of the paperclip scientist who came from, he was a Nazi, he worked on the V2 rocket. He then worked for the US government. He built the Saturn V rocket. He designed it to go to the moon. And he died in 1977. And he had access to the Roswell craft, right? And he said they're going to use fake terrorist invasions in the future, and then eventually they're going to use a fake alien invasion to control the people. So this is what he said. I mean, he's a top guy, and he was warning people about it before he died in 1977. So we've had the fake terrorist invasion with 9/11. So all of that, the information now, you see, this is what they do. They put things in people's minds in the press so that they believe them when it happens. You know what I mean? So if they put these alien stories as being plausible, then bang, they come up with a false thing. People then accept it. This is how the media works. They're programming people to accept things. But there's no way I could know that. Yeah, yeah.
That's what I say. It's like the warming us up, really.
Actually say it, it's just so blatant, really.
It's like the terrorist thing. The head of MI5 stands up and gives a speech. He would never normally give speeches. Oh, we think they're going to come from Yemen, Ireland, or what was it? I forget the other one. Why are they doing that? Because when it happens, people go, oh, well, they told us that. When it's actually them who are doing it. And that's a controversial statement.
Create a problem, wait for the reaction.
Yeah. And they provide the solution.
Of late in the mainstream media, I've noticed they're becoming slightly, less Mickey-taking, and seem to be portraying all these things. It was mentioned this thing closing the airport in China and the triangles spotted in Russia, and so on. But it's becoming more condensed now in a shorter in the last couple of months. Yeah. More and more stories coming out, mainstream news, minus the piss take. Do you think that maybe, as you suggested a few moments ago, that it's conditioning Joe Public to be, so there's something possibly
I think it could be
set up?
And it might be a year of this before something happens.
I'm sure Ian
Ukraine,
before they shut down media TV, saying that 2012 may perhaps be leading up to a London invasion type media thing.
Possibly. And
I can't comment on his theories, like, I'm just saying what I heard.
Stay tuned for part 2, in which we discuss crop circles, the moon landings, and religion. Sorry, was there somebody at the very back who hasn't spoken?
I'm fairly new to all this, and basically what is going back to the secret government part that you were saying before, and like, what's your opinion of the Bilderberg group, and like, are they a type of secret government, or do you think that's too low, or is that kind of, like you say, like, do they meet to have an influence over?
Well, the Bilderberg group, each meeting every year, they have a meeting every year, and there's normally 140 people there, but it rotates. It's not always the same 140 people, so there might be a few thousand Bilderbergers in total. Ian Crane answered that question very well. What he said was, that group is there so that those people across world governments know what the agenda is from those who are in the hidden group. So the Bilderberg group isn't a hidden group as such, but it's being passed, that's a mechanism by which they're passing down that information to NATO governments effectively, and in secret, which is appalling that they should have a secret meeting and be discussing things like depopulation, because that's what they talk about at the Bilderberg group, depopulation. How are they going to get rid of the population?
And the second, basically, you were saying before how, like, when like a prime minister becomes in power or a president, at what stage do you think that like, if they're going through the political process to become a member, like the prime minister or the leader of a government, at what point do you think they're then told of the agenda? Do you think, do they know that from the start, or is it a point where they're told this is the agenda and you have to abide by it?
I would say different leaders are told different amounts. I think Blair knew a lot. I mean, David Shaler claims he was an MI5 agent well before he became Prime Minister, or well before he became Labour leader. So I think Blair knows all about the terrorist plots being done by MI5, in my opinion. I can just tell by his body language when he's given his reaction, he knows about it. Whereas I think David Cameron, does he know the full? I don't know. Exactly, it's a need to know. It's very carefully done, subtly done. What they, you know, and it's a lot of it's probably through secret societies. Right, is anyone not you, sir? I'll try and ask people who haven't asked a question yet, and then we'll open it out.
Have you looked into hollow Earth theory?
Hollow Earth theory.
Yeah, the idea that the Earth is the crust is a few hundred miles thick, and beneath the crust is it's hollow and occupied by non-human entities. There's a central sun. There's exits at the North and South Pole, and that's where the real Illuminati live. And this is how they get the UFOs through those exits at the North and South Pole. It's worth looking into if you haven't looked into it.
I'm always open-minded on everything, right? I've not looked into that theory. I don't know of any evidence of that theory. I know that Timothy Good claims that there are 12, 13, 14 bases under the ocean throughout the world that are inhabited by ET. And he's been told that by military.
What gets me is that it goes back into the indigenous populations around the world, into their history. They all talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what you're coming out with there is David Icke type theory.
He's never mentioned it, actually.
Right.
He might not even know about it.
I mean, it's a whole subject in itself, the reptilian thing. I have been trying to, well, I have contacted David Icke, and hopefully I'm trying to get him on my TV show, because I've got a lot of questions for him. Dave?
Did you see the Look North UFO?
Yes. I saw the alleged.
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting piece of disinformation, wasn't it? Because so there was this UFO go through the bridge, and it was filmed live. And what was the conclusion at the end? The conclusion is, we don't know what it is, and we don't want to know what it is. It's a wonderful piece of BBC disinformation. It's on YouTube. Do a YouTube search on Look North UFO.
It's certainly, it's a strange one. Who's seen it? Who's seen that Look North UFO? It's just the news. It was on breakfast, like morning TV, wasn't it? And the guy's sitting there, and they have a camera on, like near where the new bridge is, and the thing just sort of goes. It's sort of going upwards on a path like that, and it, you know.
Now, if you can, there's currently a documentary called Ghost Lights. Now, I know anything that starts with ghost is a big turn-off for you, but it's the sort of thing that people are reporting to me all the time. These moving lights, which are going around in forests. I've seen them, I've photographed them, and as I say, you can pick them up on this meter that you're wanting. Yes?
The tri-field meter, yeah.
Yeah. Watch this documentary, Ghost Lights, because people are seeing these things all the time.
I mean, if you just, like, you know what I was talking about, the covert nature of these animal mutilation attacks, those two quotes I read out of those books. I mean, if you consider that, the technology is being applied where they can somehow come and go without being seen. So I'm open-minded. You know?
So I'm basically a ghost hunter, and I have come to the conclusion that 99% of the things that people put down as ghosts are actually in some way either aliens or what David Icke calls reptilians.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
You mentioned Colin Andrews.
Colin Andrews,
a number of times. I mean, how much faith do you place in him? I've followed some of his career for quite a while. Actually met the guy a number of years ago. But the last I heard, well, I'm going back about 10 years ago. I was informed that his research into crop circles was being funded by, I think, one of the Rothschilds. Is that correct or not?
Rockefeller
Maybe
Foundation.
Rockefeller, yeah.
That was a while back when he was getting that funding, and the Rockefeller Foundation were funding quite a few different areas like that, crop circles. I mean, I've exchanged quite a few emails with him, and he's seen my crop circle film where I name all these MI5, well, one MI5 person who I think is the linchpin of the crop circle. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that there isn't an unknown phenomenon in the crop. I think there is, but the majority of them are being done by this group. And I exchanged a lot of emails with him, and he's not getting any funding now, I know that. You see, that was controversial because it was almost like he was... In fact, he was the first person to say, he actually said, 80% are man-made. And all of the crop circle world hated him for saying that.
Yeah, but I think that came after he had been getting the funding from the Rockefellers. I remember reading an article by him, about 15 years ago, when he was saying that he had been approached by possibly MI5, MI6 to basically debunk, or to basically debunk all of his fellow researchers, and at the end of it, to claim that the crop circle issue was a hoax in itself. And now it's gone full tilt. You've gone 10, 15 years down the line, and he's more or less done that in a sense. Well, I know he's saying that, he's arguing that the circular ones aren't man-made, but the majority of the rest of them are.
I think, in summary, you can't trust anyone really. This is the problem. But on balance, I don't suspect Colin Andrews. I think he's a good guy. I mean, there are those who I could give the names of who I don't, and Colin Andrews isn't one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's a couple of points that somebody made in the audience. It's relating to the media, or the links between the media and the military, for example. You mentioned about Carol Rosin, and the first it would be the Reds, then it would be.
They actually said asteroid threats, didn't they? Then.
Yeah, that was the one you never mentioned.
Yeah.
I was at a UFO conference many years ago. It was when Graham Birdsall organised something. I think it was down in London. It was in the 1990s. And he said something quite strange. He said he'd been approached by somebody who'd heard that the US Department of Defense had approached Steven Spielberg and asked him to produce a movie with the name of Deep Impact about a meteor hitting the Earth.
Yeah.
And this was about, I mean, I remember hearing this, and this was about 3 years before the movie came out.
Yeah. What year are you talking?
I think the movie came out in the late 90s.
You see, it's quite possible that they were planning that, and then for some reason they thought, no, we'll not get away with that one. Do you know what I mean? But Spielberg certainly has one foot in both camps. He's connected. He wrote a letter to James Fox, who made the film, what's it called, I Know What I Saw, and the other one, Out of the Blue. And he won't allow James Fox to publish that letter because Spielberg is revealing his genuine belief in E.T., but he doesn't want that out of the public yet. Because he's got it from where, he's got it from the high, he's got it from MJ12 or wherever, because Spielberg is a key person in, well, some people call it propaganda, but putting the information out. As you say, the big asteroid film, then it happens,
And he did produce that film.
Yeah.
My second point was about bases on the moon. Somebody brought up a point. I mean, Carl Wolf mentioned about the bases on the moon, and also Donna Hare.
Yeah.
When I was in DC, I was talking to her, and she was saying like when she started talking, when other people in Houston knew about our interest in UFOs because of this incident, when she found when there was a photograph she saw of what looked like a flying disc above the Earth on a NASA photograph. She was approached by someone who was in quarantine with the Apollo astronauts, who'd said, and the astronauts had told this person who'd come to her that there was a base found on the moon. And I was always, I didn't quite understand what she meant by how was this person in quarantine with the astronauts. I thought quarantine, you're talking about from viruses or bacteria. But when I was at Lytham, St Anne's at the weekend, one of the speakers, I can't remember his name, is a moon researcher.
Right.
And he'd been talking to, I think he was doing some work in there was this big stately home somewhere down south, and he'd been doing some work in the garden, and he got to become friends with the owner of this house. And it turns out that, this bloke was British, and he was a psychiatrist, and he worked on the Apollo project, and he was involved in the quarantining of the astronauts, and it wasn't nothing to do with quarantining from viruses or bacteria.
From information.
It was the information and making sure that the astronauts were okay. And he said that the astronauts had told him that about the base on the moon.
I would recommend anyone just type in Apollo 11 1969 press conference and watch the whole press conference of Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins and Neil Armstrong. Watch that. Wouldn't you be punching the air going, oh, we did it. We watch it and then just decide the body language is all stifled. They're shitting themselves. If you'd been at the moon and you came back, how big would your head
Shout
be?
your mouth off, yeah, of course.
You'd think you were it. You know what I mean? So, and they're like, watch it. Just watch it and make your own mind up.
I mean, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong become a recluse afterwards.
Well,
I mean,
Armstrong, yeah, he went to lecturing in universities, engineering, lecturing, and wouldn't speak to anyone. Yeah.
I've got an interest in radio scanning, especially aircraft.
Right.
And I can assure you, at night time, there's a lot of talk at the moment about drones, especially in Afghanistan. But in this country, there's loads of drones at night,
right.
Operated usually by the US military, of various shapes and sizes, and aircraft tracks, paths have been shifted to make way for them. Also, have you got any opinion on rods?
They've been photographed. Well, not really. I don't have an opinion. I know that people have produced photographs of these rod-shaped UFOs, which, they come and go very quickly, don't they? I don't know. You're saying that the Look North UFO.
I think that's what the Look North one was, a rod.
I mean, that Look North one, I mean, could it be a firework? I don't know. I think you've got to explore all the possibilities, because you're then in danger of people that find one case that and then it's proven the other way. Then you're labelled, you know what I mean? So I would say it's inconclusive, that the Look North one. It's not good enough, It's certainly curious.
It's travelling that fast, you see.
But yeah. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah,
yes, sir. Sorry.
Richard, it's not a popular question.
Sure.
But you come across as a great researcher, pretty thorough. But do you not think you could be creating more damage than good? Because the powers that be, they've gone to a lot of trouble to keep this quiet.
Are you referring to the UFO stuff or the terrorism stuff?
Well, both.
You see, with regards to the terrorism stuff, I was talking about this to my mother, and I was trying to explain to her why I'm doing it, because she gets worried, right? I said, Mum, if you saw a murder, what would you do?
But ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, but you know what I'm getting at.
It's true that
I've witnessed a murder in London of 52 people on that tube, and I know who did it.
Yeah.
The MI5 did it, Mossad did it. It wasn't done by Islamic terrorists. So I either do nothing and just sit with that knowledge, or I try and spread information.
Yeah, could be game
just
over
with the
as well.
microphone, the guy said, ignorance is bliss, but knowledge is power. I mean, it's truth. That's all it is, truth. They're lying to us.
What could happen?
Are you talking to me or to everyone?
Everybody. What happens when you take the top off the jaw of worms? What happens then?
Well, I would examine the worms. If the world's got worms in it, then I want to know. I don't want to like pretend it's not there. I don't want to live in a. I'd rather know the truth, because, and this is what I say. Once all the information's there, if you knew all of the information that's hidden, you then are getting closer to the real truth about where we came from and who we are.
I'm not
who wouldn't want to know that?
I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying is,
if somebody blamed you for something you haven't done, would you like people to try and look into it, or just believe what everybody says?
It's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. We did actually. Yeah. We went around Wickham and other places with the camera. We were saying to people, if
I mean, there's a reason why they're keeping it from you.
Yeah, John Duffield said that to me. That, look, Richard, leave that alone. Leave it alone, because they're actually protecting the masses by doing this. Well, I don't buy that. I think we're ready. even then, even in the 40s when they knew about it, you know, they should have just bit the bullet and told everyone.
What happens if they do tell everybody? You don't know.
Well, you don't. But I think we'll get out of bed the next morning and go, bloody hell, we're not alone in the universe. I think religion will take a kick in the bollocks, but that's all. I think. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Well, when the absolute truth comes out, religion is like trying to nail a piece of jelly to the wall. They'll just move the goalposts and say, well, that's what we meant. We meant that there was extraterrestrials, and we meant that they were our brothers, and actually our Bible's correct, really, in a way. They'll just move it around, which is fair enough. Fine, do that.
That religion's just been there to put us off the scent. It's because I'm
yeah. How long have you got? You know what I mean?
No, I'm a strong
believer. Who wants to talk about religion?
No, but do you think that that's what's been there to take us take our eye off the ball? Because we went to school and we were told, like, you're going to go to hell because you didn't go to church on Sunday.
Yeah, but you've got to go back at least 2,000 years to answer who put the religion there and why, and even before then. You know, the Egyptian religions, who put them there? The Sumerian religion, who was putting it there and why? And I agree, it was to control man.
You've got like the Christians, but then you've got the Protestants, the Catholics, and if you take that back and you keep peeling it back, then you'll get to the truth. But everything puts their little side to it and their little religion. You know, you see all the different religions you get.
Yeah, and the fact that there's so many is...
And there's that many...
They divide and conquer.
There's that many skins on the onion, you'll never get to the truth.
I mean, this whole thing about the mosque at 9/11, they've done that deliberately, because they want to stoke it up.
Stoke it up against the Muslims. Muslims to believe everything.
Was the blacks in the...
There was the
or the commies. You know, before the Berlin Wall came down, it was the commies that you had to hate. We're all people. We're all
everybody.
people.
The Jews, everybody gets... Yeah.
Richard Dawkins, you know all about religion.
Yes.
Well, I think it's all
You can go on the Richplanet forum, and he's been a focal point of a lot of banter on that. In part 3, we discuss the false flag terrorist attack on London, known as 7/7, which took place in 2005.
But like I've got two kids. I've got a little girl and a boy. Now, if I'd brought them up, like they say, I'd give my son to a devout Catholic, or, you know, brought him up to not like Islam or like that. And when I brought my daughter up, and I give her away to a devout Muslim, 20 years' time she'd have been walking about with a burqa on. He wouldn't have. It wasn't because they were born that way, it's because they were educated that way. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? And that's what we'll never have any peace until we educate the kids that there is no religion, you know.
Well, it's like if you travel the world. I mean, I haven't been to a lot of countries, but I've been to some Muslim countries. Wherever you go,
they treat you all right.
People are courteous. They're respectful. They want to know about your culture. You want to know about their culture. But then you watch the news. They're trying to put man against man.
Oh, have you seen what the Muslims has done now?
Sorry?
That's like me daddy, he'll sit and he'll read the paper and he'll go, oh, I've seen what them Muslims has done now. And I said, well, what's a Muslim done to you? It's just what you, like you say, it's what you read in the paper, what you see on the television. That's your view, unless you go out and you actually meet people from different races and religions. I mean, then you realise it's just a load of rubbish.
You know, I've got my best friend's in the RAF, he's wing commander. And he'll string them up. He thinks they're shit. And I'll say to him, you know, he started watching my show actually. Yes, sir.
Since we're on religion,
the few groans here.
Now, the Shah of Saudi and the Bushes are like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the Bin Ladens were like that with the Bushes as well.
Yeah. You know, it's a...
There was someone sent me a good clip the other day. It was Benazir Bhutto being interviewed by David Frost, obviously before she was murdered, and she says to him, she names someone who murdered someone, and she says, "Oh, he was also the person who murdered Osama bin Laden."
And he also had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. Now I know that having dealings,
and then just continues on talking. You can see the whole thing. But if you watch what they put out on air, the BBC, they cut that bit out.
Yeah.
That she said that she knows the person who murdered bin Laden. Well, that could be why she was bumped off.
That's why they've never caught him. He's dead.
Exactly. I mean, before Gordon Brown got booted out of power, he was there going, I think we should be looking for Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. It's just hilarious. So, but he's been told to say that by the Americans to start putting that message out.
Yeah.
I was just saying it's a shame there's not more people like you that will come out and tell the truth, because I've had my eyes like really wide open, haven't I? Because I was like really quite ignorant when I had to tell like everything to news and
it's
everything like that, and now I've got a total different look on life.
It's a good point you make, because the question is, how do you grow this movement of people who aren't trusting the mainstream media? And I don't have an answer to that. I'm doing all I can, but all I would say is that if you do try and, because you'll say to your friend what I'm saying, and they'll say you're mad, right? So you can't tell someone the information. I would recommend you say, oh, I saw this interesting thing last night. You really want to watch it. I'm not sure if it's true. Don't lecture them.
Oh, no, I don't.
No, I'm not saying you do, but I'm saying this
I tell them to watch it.
The technique. Actually, I'm not saying that. Someone who I know who is a police officer. Someone who I know is a police officer. He's just started watching my program, and he's intrigued by the 9/11 stuff. And you see, 9/11, I think, could be the key, because that's probably the thing you can convince people on. There's so much evidence that it was an inside job. It's just untrue. So that's what I would point people to. Find loose change in films like that. Just say, watch that on the net, because you're not being told the truth. And if you think about it, all of the military action now in the Middle East, it's been justified by 9/11.
I mean, I got
on a lie.
Like my husband, because obviously he watches like all the time, and he says, "Oh, you should just like give it like a chance." So I did, and I totally agree with everything that you say. Totally.
Thank you.
Throw one more in the mix now. I'll shut up.
Sure.
With regards to this whole movement, if you like, opening people's eyes, where do you envisage it going? I mean, it's got to go somewhere, and obviously putting it across to as many people as possible. It's trying to keep the momentum going. What's your message to people to keep it going?
To just spread the word. Because there's no way it's ever going to come through the TV and media, because they've got a stranglehold on it. It has to come from the roots upwards. And the problem is, as long as people have got enough food and they've got a house and a car, they don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care. So I actually ponder this question every day of my life. How can we get this across to other people? And
I've even thought about giving out CDs in the middle of the monument, you know, just like downloading them free and just giving stuff out.
We meet here in this room on the third Sunday of every month at 2 p.m. It's a North East Truth group.
Yes.
We've got a website, just Google it.
Yeah, I'll just repeat that. There is a group in the North East of England called North East Truth. There's a link on my website to that group, and they meet here once a month. And all of these issues are discussed in that group. They've got their own radio program. In fact, they're linked to other truth groups around 2 p.m. on
third Sunday of every month.
Third Sunday of every month here. And when I can, I've been to a few of the meetings, but I can't always get. But the third Sunday of every month, North East Truth. The radio program is fantastic. I think it's 9 o'clock on Tuesdays, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you can listen to that online, their radio show, and they've had Ian Crane on and a lot of other people. So there are groups, and it can only come from the bottom up. It's because mainstream TV wouldn't allow. I'll just explain one reason why I'm trying to record all of this is because every single studio debate on television is orchestrated, it's planned, question time, everyone is vetted. Every debate you see on TV, you won't get a genuine view from a man off the street. There's no way they would dare have. They used to. Can anyone remember Friday Night Live on ITV? Was it ITV? It was a Northeast discussion program on every week, and it went out live, and you'd put your hand up and your view would be on TV. There's no way they would do that now. The audiences are vetted, and that's why I wanted to film this debate, because as long as it's recorded okay, I'll put this out on my TV program. Yes, sir.
Hey, Rich. With some more recent work, you showed at the interval before about the ball and the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you had any feedback from the 9/11 truth movement or anybody across the pond, whether it be negative or positive?
Yes, I've had loads of feedback, 90% positive. It's another biggie. Because you see,
the truth movement itself.
Not really from the truth movement. You tend to get people who are involved who will come and give you their opinion without saying I'm from the truth movement. You see, it's the whole no planes theory, which most people won't touch. They won't go near it. Alex Jones, for example, he won't go near it, and there's a question as to why. Some people think that the no planes theory is trying to subvert the truth movement, whereas other people think, well, people who have infiltrated the truth movement deliberately keep the no planes theory out, because that's actually what happened. So.
Well, it was an excellent piece of work you did, Richard. Yeah. I think you deserve applause for it.
How are you doing for time? 10:30. It's 10:30 p.m. I mean, do you want to go for another drink? I'm happy to stand here till 11 o'clock and answer questions. I just need to check the computer. Yes, madam.
Quickly ask what your take was about Jimenez, about the assassination.
Jimenez, yeah.
Well, you think he knew something, and he had to be got rid of?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, it was sort of about 2 weeks after 7/7 that he was murdered, and he wasn't just.
I mean, it was overkill, pure
overkill.
overkill.
It was total overkill. He was an electrician. It smells to me that he was involved. Either he knew about the placement of the bombs in 7/7, or he was involved.
That's what I think. Yeah.
That's very obviously. You can't prove that, but.
I mean, there's very little out there about it, because I've tried to sort of look into that, but there's very little to say evidentially that possibly he was involved in planting bombs, or you know.
No one actually knows who he worked for when he was before he was murdered. Yeah.
Will it never come out who he worked for?
I don't think so.
I've never found out who's. Yeah.
We're going to go over to Ireland on 11th of the 11th, because there's a guy he calls himself Muad'Dib. He made the film 7/7 Ripple Effect, and he's going to, the British government are trying to extradite him from Ireland to stand.
He's trying to belittle him.
Yeah, I mean, all he did.
Is that why he was on bail on the show?
It's just unbelievable. I'll explain what happened. He made a film about 7/7, what he believes to be the truth, and I agree with the film wholeheartedly. The alleged terrorists were patsies who thought they were taking part in a mock terror drill, and they were then murdered. That's what his film said. And the 7/7 conspiracy files, the BBC thing, the whole point of that was to try and debunk his film. These friends of the alleged terrorists were on trial for helping them in, I think, April 2009. So he was outraged, so he sent a couple of copies of his film to the court, say this is evidence which should be submitted to the court. 7 guys came to his house, arrested him. He was banged up. He was banged up for 23 days for trying to pervert the course of justice. And he wasn't sending films to jury members. He sent one to the judge and one to the jury foreman, saying, please consider this as evidence. And it was never submitted as evidence. The 3 men were acquitted, And the British government are trying to extradite him from Ireland to stand charges for trying to pervert the course of justice. So we're going to attend that trial in Ireland. We're going to interview him. I mean, there are issues about him. He has written some peculiar book.
Oh, well, let me know when the trial is. I'll be there for sure.
11th of the 11th at the Supreme Court of Ireland. I mean, it's just the most preposterous case you've ever heard in your life. It's like me sending a copy of Silent Killers to a trial, saying, Judge, can you consider this evidence? And then me getting arrested by 7 guys just for sending a DVD to a court.
Bloody ridiculous.
23 days in prison he had, while he was waiting for the hearings.
Do you know of these supposed people who had died at 7/7 and now miraculously walking the streets?
I'm not aware of any. I did try, and there's one woman, I can't remember her name, who's lost her legs, and she's a big campaigner and stuff. I contacted her, will you come on my show, be interviewed? And you don't get responses from anyone, you know. But it's a whole another area, 7/7, which, I mean, I interviewed Nick Colostrom, who wrote the book Behind the Veil of 7/7, superb book. He's a really nice chap. God, if you were an investigative journalist wanting something to investigate, if you wanted 7/7, there's so much you could do.
Yeah, the train that they were supposed to be on was cancelled.
Yeah, and then when the came out,
they couldn't have been there at any time.
Yeah.
That and the bus being redirected.
The young lad, he was known as the Gentle Giant. He was playing cricket the night before with his mates. You know,
yeah, we've just been talking.
The other one, the alleged lead Muslim terrorist, used to walk school children to his primary school in the morning. He used to walk around the houses, picking them up and walking them to school.
We've heard also...
He was like a pillar of the community.
Yeah. We've also heard that the leader, sorry I can't remember his name, was supposed to have gone to the Houses of Parliament as a guest of MP.
He did.
Before then, I mean...
I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Yes, Mohammed Siddiqui Khan.
Yeah,
that's it.
he was actually friendly with the MP.
Yeah, he was. He went to the Houses of Parliament. He was given a tour of the Houses of Parliament.
I personally think they were set up like...
Yeah, well, the guy who set them up was called Rashid Aswat, and he's in Broadmoor now, because he was an MI6 agent, Muslim, but was working for MI6, and he was, I believe, he was the one who lured them into this plot, and he telephoned them 20 times on the morning of 7/7 when it happened. He got on a plane and left the country, and he was the one who's got them involved.
Yeah.
There's a lady called Marion Hyman who died on 7/7, and I'll just briefly explain that. She worked at Canary Wharf, and she was travelling from sort of north-west London on the tube. She was evacuated off at King's Cross because the bombs had gone off, and she telephoned her dad to say, I'm going to go to work at Canary Wharf. I'm going to get there regardless because they're telling people to go home. 2 minutes later, the bus at Tavistock Square exploded, which is miles the other way. Well, it's not miles, but it's the opposite direction to where she was headed. She turns up on the bus. Her family were looking for her for a whole week. They didn't know where she was. They were petrified, and the authorities, well, we don't know. A week later, turns out she was on the bus, nowhere near where she was going. Now, she also telephoned a friend at work after the bus had exploded and said, I'm coming into work at Canary Wharf. Now, the 3 alleged terrorists, it is said that they headed to Canary Wharf when they were trying to flee. Now, I think she's probably spoken to them and got wind of the plot and maybe even took them to Canary Wharf. So they've took her out with the 3 young Muslim lads, and they've thought, what can we do with her? I know, we'll just say she was on the bus. So they've murdered her.
The bomb damage come from under the carriage. Which,
I mean,
if you had a good line...
The type of explosive used the CCTV footage that they keep showing on the BBC News, it's got all the timestamps removed. You can't make out the people, and they keep brainwashing people that these Muslims went through. They weren't there. It's a lie.
There's just that many. If it was on a television program, there's that much evidence to prove they were innocent.
None of the footage shown up. Watch on the news when they show the clips of 7/7 and see if the timestamps there. None of the timestamps are there. There's only one image, which is the photograph, which was
At
faked.
Luton Station.
Yeah, at Luton
Yeah.
Station. That's got the timestamp on
Which
it.
is dodgy
They've added them
photo,
in.
no?
You can, if you've got Photoshop, you can see where they've added them in.
Yeah, you can see the rail going through
Yeah.
his chest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always different.
You see, that alone, the fact that the authorities have used fabricated evidence and tried to prevent
think
the
they would
course of
have done it
justice
better,
is
wouldn't you?
enough. There's no way, if there was a trial, they would be found guilty at all.
Yeah.
No way. Which is why they're trying to steer away from a
Yeah.
proper inquest. The
Frightening.
inquest they're having now is to try and find out if the authorities could have done anything to prevent it. So they've set the terms of the inquest to ignore the real problem.
What happened? Yeah.
But no, it's
See, the same thing happened with Lockerbie bombing and Al Mugrahi.
How long have we got?
It was a ploy to get allow Reagan to bomb Gaddafi.
Yeah.
I knew people who were inside with Al Mugrahi.
Yeah.
And they all said he was innocent, that he should never have been...
Yeah. And the reason why they let him out, because he had cancer, well, he didn't have cancer, but they said he had cancer. The reason why they let him out is because they'd uncovered new witnesses who were going to stand up in another, like a retrial, and say, I lied at the original court. I lied. I was told to lie. They knew that was coming, so they let him out on compassionate grounds, and they fabricated his cancer. Yeah. But what happens in the media is there's this thing where the Americans are really upset that we let him out and he's still alive. It's all theatre. It's just acting. Welcome on board the Richplanet starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall. This week's show is a double bill about the animal mutilation phenomenon. In the first hour, I will be screening a talk I gave in Kirkcaldy, Scotland in May 2010 about the animal mutilation phenomenon and our government's blatant attempts to cover up the facts. At 9 p.m, for the first time on UK television, or indeed anywhere, I report on an incredible horse mutilation case discovered recently in East Sussex. These shows are not for the squeamish and contain graphic images of animal injuries, particularly after 9 p.m. in the Sussex Report. Brace yourself for the truth. Thank you. I'm Richard D. Hall, and I'm going to be talking about animal mutilation and the government cover-up. Now, my background is in engineering. I became a chartered electrical engineer in 1998. Over the last 3 years, I've been researching the UFO phenomenon and other related phenomena, including the animal mutilation phenomenon and the government cover-up. But before I go into it, I just want to make a general statement about the truth movement, because there are a group of people in this country who see the fact that our mainstream media are covering up the truth and are lying to us across the board. And I guess a lot of the people in this room, probably most of you, realise that. But I just want to point out that you're actually a very, very tiny, tiny minority of people. Because if you look at say, Edge Media Television, the AV conferences, this conference, and all of the other truth conferences, there's probably only about, I would estimate, about 100,000 people who see through the media lies. It's not a big number in the UK because there are 61 million people in the UK. And I just want to illustrate to you the mountain that I think we face in wiping out the mainstream media and basically getting the truth onto the agenda. That's a graph. It shows the 100,000 that I believe see through media lies and the 61 million people who don't. And the mainstream media are going to do their utmost to make sure that 100,000 stays where it is. So they're not going to help increasing that figure. And that figure has to increase to 1 million and 10 million. And then we will, and only then will we see change. And the only way to get that figure up is by the internet and word of mouth. And it's down to us, basically. So when you go away from this conference, you know, join some of these new truth groups that are coming up on the internet. There's a lot of them springing up all over the place. Join your local truth group, get involved, get 10, 20, 30 of your friends involved. Because that number's not going to grow with the help of the mainstream media. It's down to individuals, very important individuals, those 100,000 people, all of yourself included, because you've seen through the media lies. Okay. Animal mutilation and the government cover-up. Now, when I refer to the government cover-up, by government I don't mean the useless chocolate fire guards that sit on the green seats of Parliament. I mean people within DEFRA and people within MI5. That's what I'm talking about. The people who basically don't disappear when we get a new government. They're there all the time. And I just want you to bear in mind this statement when listening to my presentation today. It's something that was in the Sherlock Holmes books. When you remove the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So just bear that in mind when you're considering the information. Well, the first point I would like to deal with, what I'll do first is just ask the audience, has anybody seen my film Silent Killers that has been broadcast on Edge Media? Okay, so, and has anybody, how many of you are actually aware of what the animal mutilation phenomenon is? So maybe a half to two-thirds. Okay. Now I am going to show some pretty horrible graphic images of dead animals in this presentation. I mean, it's not too bad, but anyone who's sensitive to that kind of thing, if you walk out halfway through, you know, I'm not going to be offended. Okay, I'll just summarise what the phenomenon is. Throughout the world, including parts of the UK, since at least 1954, animals known to be in perfect physical health are found dead with very peculiar injuries on and inside their bodies. The nature of the injuries is surgical and cannot be explained by animal predation. This has been confirmed by pathologists. Although thousands of cases worldwide are known about, no human being has ever been seen, caught or arrested for mutilation incidents. Bright orange or white spheres of light are sometimes witnessed in the areas where animals are found. So that's a summary of the phenomenon. Okay? Now, I just want to deal with the extraterrestrial aspect of this first and get it out of the way, because some people believe that these events are being carried out by extraterrestrials. Some people believe, they say, well, what a load of nonsense. Whichever camp you're in, it actually doesn't matter. The information I'm going to present to you is important to everyone, because without question, there is something extremely peculiar going on in this country with animals, and our government are covering it up. What the source of the problem is, nobody knows. Perhaps there are people within some of these secret government groups who do know, but nobody outside of those groups knows. So I don't want to get into an argument over whether it's an extraterrestrial phenomenon or not. That's not the point of this presentation, to convince you that that's what's doing this. It's to present the facts. Okay, two of the, I would say, the world's leading researchers in this phenomenon, Linda Moulton Howe on the right-hand side. She investigated this in the early 1980s. She made a film about cases in America, basically, of animal mutilation. And her film, A Strange Harvest, was released in 1981. It won an Emmy Award. And David Caton in the UK has been investigating cases since 1997. David Caton is ex-RAF. He worked at British Aerospace for 28 years. he had a very responsible position when he retired. He devoted his life to investigating animal mutilation, or that was one of the things he investigated. And he's done some absolutely phenomenal work, David Caton. I'm going to be referring to David throughout the talk. Okay. Now, when an animal attacks another animal in a predatory type scenario, the animal that's trying to escape, its heart's pumping fast. So generally, a fox or whatever will go for the neck, and blood is spilt basically because of the struggle. And predation attacks like this, they're a mess. So you have blood on the ground, you have blood on the carcass, and just generally the throat. So it's blood and guts, and there's a mess. And these incidents, none of them are anything like this. Okay, so just pointing out what predation looks like. Now, just over a year ago, I made contact with the Animal Pathology Field Unit, who've been investigating these cases for the last 10 years. And it's not easy for them because the government are covering up, and I will come on to that. Like I said, David Caton at the top, Mike Freebury and Phil Hoyle. Phil Hoyle has been investigating cases in Shropshire, Mike Freebury down on Dartmoor, and you know, some of their evidence, it's just unbelievable. Now, they've had the help of Professor Tony Fremont, who is he's a human pathologist, but he helped them out. They would take tissue samples to him, and if you were to speak to Tony Fremont, he would say to you, there's something completely inexplicable going on here. So that gave their group a high degree of credibility, the fact that they had a pathologist on board. Now, I'm just going to quickly whiz around this diagram and explain some of the classic injuries that I found. And we don't always find all of the characteristics in mutilation cases. Sometimes it's just some of them. So starting at the top right, often animals that are in perfect health one day, the following day they'll be found in this position where they've got jaw flesh stripped very, very cleanly down to the bone, and it's generally just off one side. The tongue is extremely cleanly excised with a sharp implement. It's provably not bitten off or took off by a predator. Eyes, often one eye is removed. Organs are often removed from the throat, such as the esophagus. And quite often there are puncture wounds found in the ventral neck area where seemingly all of the animal's blood is drained. I'll come on to that. And one of the classic signs is that small holes are cut into the body. And I'll also speak about that in more detail, generally in the abdomen, where large organs are removed from very small holes. The sex organs are often removed, and we see that in the middle, what we call a rectal core, where the animal's rectum, there's a hole maybe the size of a 50p piece or a little bit bigger, with a sealed edge, and the entire rectum is removed from that orifice. And smaller animals tend to have holes in the centre of their head, and quite often the animal's entire brain, internal organs and spinal column are removed through a 10p piece size hole in the centre of their head. And also ears are often cleanly excised, and it's usually just one ear, but I will come on to that a little bit later. Now, I mentioned the jaw strip. Now, David Caton visited an abattoir a while back, and the guy at the abattoir said, in order to get an animal's jaw that clean, with all of the muscle and all of the tissue away from the jaw, would take high pressure steam, and it would take quite a long time before you could remove all of the tissue to get it in that sort of condition. Okay, so I showed that picture to a farmer a few weeks ago, and she said, oh, well, a badger's done that. So the farmers, they come out with these explanations, you know, without really knowing, you know, badgers generally go for the liver. They rip the carcass open, they go for the liver and the heart. They wouldn't spend hours nibbling away at a jaw to get it stripped clean like that. Here's another example. This was in West Wales. That's a ram. And look how clean the flesh is from that jaw. This photograph, incidentally, was censored for 4 years by Devon Police. Mike Freebury went through a legal battle submitting freedom of information requests, and it took him 4 years to get that photograph off Devon Police. And as I said, the tongue's removed cleanly, and usually the animal is dead when the tongue is removed. This is shown because there's no blood in the mouth. So the heart wasn't pumping when the tongue was cut off. And like I said before, neat-edged circular holes. Now these holes, they're sometimes circular, but they're quite often teardrop shaped. If you just look to the left-hand side on that diagram, I'll zoom in a little bit, you can see it's sort of a teardrop shaped hole, and quite often the edges are sealed in a way that wouldn't occur if it was just made with a sharp implement. So some pathologists that have got involved with this, and it's very few, believe that either a very sharp knife or laser has been used along with high heat, and it's the high heat which creates this almost perfect seal. And this next case, this was a lamb, and you can, if you just zoom in there, the fur around the wound has actually been, you know, moved or taken off as if it's been prepared for surgery. So that provably that has not been, you know, done by an animal. And this animal had internal organs removed from a hole which appears to be too small for those organs to fit. This case in Argentina in the year 2000, that cow was a perfect, healthy specimen the day before that photograph was taken. It had broken legs, so it looked like it had been dropped from a height, and it had the classic jaw strip you can see there. Now this animal, again, it had had all of its internal organs removed, but the only orifice on the body was a hole in its rectum about 15 centimetres in diameter, and its brain had been removed from that hole as well. And the farmer telephoned the police and the sheriff, and a veterinary pathologist came along to cut the thing open, and they opened it up, and it was completely empty, with just a hole this size. And like I say, it was running around perfectly healthy the day before. And there we see the hole there. Not very pretty. Okay, and like I said, ears are often removed, cleanly excised, and quite often it's just the one ear. And the same with the jaw strip, quite often just one side. And in this particular case, an ear was removed, and as farmers do, they tag their animals with these tags which go through the ear. Whatever had done it had no need for the tag, so they just left that on the ground. But the carcass was there with no ear. And as I mentioned before, holes in the ventral neck area where, on occasion, all of the animal's blood is removed. Now, when an animal dies, if it's got a wound, it will pump out about 60% of its blood before its cardiovascular system collapses and it dies. So there's always blood left in the body. But some of these bodies, they have no blood left in them. There's no blood on the grass, there's no blood on the carcass, no blood in the carcass. So some kind of technology has to have been applied in order to remove all that blood. The heart isn't capable of pumping it out. Okay. So here are some of the characteristics. There's never any traces of blood on the ground, never any tracks or footprints near or around these cases. Often they're in remote, inhospitable locations, and as I said, lights are sometimes witnessed. Now, helicopters are also sometimes witnessed. So people pass this off, they say, well, the lights were helicopters. Okay, and on many occasions there probably are helicopters, but you might say, well, are the helicopters chasing the orbs, or are the helicopters tidying up after whatever is doing this? So it's not necessarily the military people in the helicopters that are carrying out these attacks. And occasionally, Phil Hoyle in particular has found ground markings near locations of where mutilations have taken place. I've got some photographs. This one, it's about 6 meters in diameter, so about a foot wide. I'll just zoom in on it there, and apparently the grass doesn't grow for years and years afterwards. It becomes very baked. Okay. Now, and again, it's not just farm animals. Tony Dodd, he passed away last year, he wrote this book, and he was a police sergeant in North Yorkshire, and he was interested in the UFO phenomenon, and he became sort of if anyone had a mutilation case, it would get sent to Tony Dodd. So he had many, many cases in Yorkshire, and he said that he would sometimes, there would be a field where there would be a fox, a badger and a sheep, all mutilated. So there's no kind of relationship between the animals. It wasn't just sheep. So sometimes it was wild animals as well, and occasionally domestic animals. It's a worldwide phenomenon. There have been cases in Argentina, a lot in America and Scandinavia. And this is the one thing that intrigues me the most, and that is the fact that they are very, very covert in nature. Nobody has ever been witnessed, ever been arrested, shot with a shotgun, seen running away, ever And there are thousands of instances of this kind. No one's ever been caught. We'll come on to that. And there are hotspots of activity. It's not happening everywhere. There's a hotspot which is just west of Shrewsbury. There's a hotspot on Dartmoor, and in the past there's been hotspots in the Whitby and Scarborough area. Okay, just going to have a little look at this clip from my film Silent Killers. David Clayton here is talking about a case on the Severn Estuary. Now, what's interesting about this case is the field. There were 16 sheep mutilated, 40 injured, and the field, one side of it was backed onto the Severn Estuary, the other side was a railway line, and the other two sides were adjacent fields. So there was no either access by road or foot. It was a very inaccessible field, and apparently it was pouring down with rain. Even the farmer said he wouldn't have liked to have been out on that evening. So it's about a 4-minute clip.
There's reports initially of 40 injured animals, 16 dead. This happened on...
And the location is on the Severn Estuary, on the Forest of Dean side. Right. So the RSPCA attended, apparently, a big cat expert, a fellow called Danny Bamping from the British Big Cat Society, who declared, so the farmer told me, to the TV camera people, crew who were there, that it was not the work of big cats, and he disappeared. The RSPCA were mystified and were more interested in making a plug for the public watching the TV news to get funds for the RSPCA, which is what they do. So the farmer was absolutely fuming about it because he's lost all his animals with no real explanation. So the CID came back in, we happened to meet two of them, and a vet from a practice in Chepstow, a lady called Jane Glover Hill, appeared, armed with a big knife, to detach the heads of 4 of the animals and take a whole one, which I helped her in the car boot with, back to the veterinary practice to conduct some radiography on the heads to look for evidence of lead shot.
Right.
And
was there any evidence of lead shot?
No, absolutely none at all. Clean as a whistle.
Did these have any of the mutilation signs? Any of the 14?
No, yes, in a sense. When I heard of this, I rang the TV people in Bristol, who gave me the name of the farmer. So I rang him, said I'm in Manchester, 200 miles odd away, and said, did any of the animals in this big heap on his tractor have a jaw strip? Yeah. And he said, oh yes, I think you're right, they did. It did. So I said, can you go and check to see if the tongue is missing? Right. So he said, oh, okay. So he put the phone down, and after about, I don't know, half an hour, he came back on the phone to me and said, absolutely amazed, he said, you're right, the tongue's missing. So he thought, how do I know, 200 miles away, I haven't clapped eyes on these animals, know that the tongue was missing, because you've got to force the jaw open to see that, because rigor mortis starts to set in, which makes it hard to open the jaw. So he was really intrigued. So that was enough. She invited me and Robert to go back with him to Chepstow before we headed back up north, while they did some of the radiography. So and that proved that firearms were not used categorically. But she found some very interesting wounds. This photograph with the head detached, Jane Glover Hill discovered, with dissection I guess eventually, that these 2 holes were in the side of the head, a bit similar to the lamb from Shropshire, but deeper, within the bigger hole. Right. And she found they seemed to line up. And she actually passed an implement through from one side to the other, which was a knitting needle actually, which she suggested a clamping device had been forcibly, a lot of force, she said, would have been applied to press these 2 appeared to be blind holes, but diametrically opposite each side of the head. And then this had missed the top of the brain that came out the other side. But that clearly was not done by a bullet. The main thrust of it was to eliminate firearms. And that's really all they were interested in doing. That was the veterinary practice's brief, to eliminate the firearms. And once that was done, the police lost interest. The case was closed. So nobody had any answer to it, basically.
Okay, and that's quite often what happens in these cases. You know, the police aren't interested. As long as there's no firearms used, they go away. The big cat guy said, well, it's not big cats, I'm not interested. The RSPCA just made a plug for their funds. They weren't interested. So they had no answer to it. And the holes in that sheep's head, it had almost looked like they'd been drilled into the skull, 3/4 of an inch diameter, and then another small hole inside that hole. And provably, they were not done by firearms. Okay, I mentioned that the nature of these attacks is very, very covert. No one's ever been seen, caught, or shot carrying them out. And I just want to read a couple of extracts to try and shed some light on this covert side to it. This is from Tony Dodd's book, who, like I said, was an ex-police sergeant in North Yorkshire. Some of the farmers in the area who lost stock reported these unnatural deaths to the Ministry of Agriculture, and they were visited by inspectors from the government agency. But at no time were they given an explanation for what was happening, nor did they find their official visitors helpful or communicative about a problem that was affecting their livelihoods. In fact, they found these shadowy figures so obstructive they simply do not report the mysterious deaths anymore. Cedar heard from one of his contacts that small mutilated animals were taken to the Ministry of Agriculture depot, where they were sealed in plastic containers and sent abroad. Unfortunately, he does not know where they went. Determined to get to the bottom of what was going on and protect their livestock, the farmers arranged a vigil at one field between Scarborough and Whitby, where a spate of mutilations had occurred. They hired infrared cameras, which would be triggered by movement in the field. The sensors were rigged so they would record any movement above the height of the sheep, so that they would not be fired by the sheep moving around in the field. Armed with shotguns, a group of farmers spent the night in the open field in the open next to the field. The cameras flashed 3 times, but the farmers neither saw nor heard anything. The following morning, however, they found another mutilated lamb only yards from their observation point, and 2 more at the other side of the field. There had been no sound of disturbance in the flock during the night, and again the mutilations were surgically precise and bloodless, each animal having a small, neat hole in the forehead and its rectum cored out. When the films were developed, they showed only a black background with a small white cloud in the centre. So there's something very strange going on there. And again, in Timothy Good's book, this is from a case in Colorado. At about 17:30 on the 13th of September 1994, during a wave of livestock mutilations in New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, Larry Gardia was checking a herd of cattle belonging to Estevan Sanchez in Luna Canyon near Las Vegas, northeast New Mexico, when he heard a loud, dull hum like a transformer or the sound an arc welder makes. The cows began running away from the noise, but Gardia noticed that 3 cows appeared to be pulled by an invisible beam towards the sound. They were struggling and bawling and were pulled through the trees, said Gardia. I shot at the beam with a 30.6 rifle and the hum stopped and the cows stopped bawling. 1 cow was found dead and mutilated, another injured and another missing. Frightened, Gardia returned to the ranch house and reported the incident to the sheriff's department. Greg Lumbach, Mora County Sheriff's deputy, accompanied Gardia to the area where the incident occurred and examined the dead cow. Its jaw appeared to be skinned on the right side, and its tongue, anus, and reproductive organs had been removed. So again, that's just showing you that there's something very peculiar going on here, something capable of carrying out these incidents invisibly. And this would explain why no one's ever seen them, being perpetrated. Okay, now a very controversial question that might come into your head when you're listening to all of this is, has there been any cases reported of this happening to human beings? Well, the answer is yes. In 1988, there was a case came to light, and the photographs I'm going to show you are a little bit gory. They're of a man who has a jaw strip, and he has some of the small holes in his body through which organs were removed. These are police photographs, and I do have a report that accompanies them if anyone wants to come and have a read of it. I'll just whiz through them. So there we see the jaw flesh stripped. There's a hole in his right arm where muscle material was removed through that hole. There's a hole in the side of his head here where his brain was removed. And again, you can see there in his stomach area, organs were removed from his stomach. He had the rectal core, which is the same as the sheep and cattle experience. And you can see the hole in his stomach here and in his leg, and his internal organs were removed through those small holes. And Tony Fremont, the pathologist working for the APFU, and he's a human pathologist, he said, "I don't see how we can do this," when he looked at those photographs. Okay, now, that's not the only case, because there's been cases in the United Kingdom. And perhaps this is the reason behind a cover-up, the fact that it has been known to happen to humans in the UK. Now, I mentioned Tony Dodd before, who was a sergeant serving in North Yorkshire. And he became sort of a contact point for mutilation cases. And before he died, he told David Caton about 3 cases that he knew of from his position in the police. And one was in Dalby Forest. And apparently what happened was, over a period of a few weeks, there was 6 or 7 mutilated bodies appeared in the same field in Dalby Forest. All of the hair was missing from those bodies, and they had some of the classic mutilation injuries. And apparently, some of this leaked out, the information. So a cover story was given to the press that someone was putting mannequin dummies into this field. That was the story given to the press, but they were actually real bodies. And what Tony says happens in these cases is they don't get reported as murders or deaths. They're basically, so all those people who were found in Dalby Forest are just on the missing persons register, because as soon as you let the family members know that the body's dead, then they want to see it, then they want it examined, and then huge questions of massive significance are then start to be asked, and that they don't want that to happen. And Tony Dodd spoke of another case in Brecon Beacon area where a family of 4 were found laid out by the side of their vehicle, 4x4, and another case in Staffordshire with an 8-year-old girl found with mutilation injuries. Now, when I made Silent Killers film, somebody who watched the film rang me up and said, "Well, Richard, why are you making films about stupid animal mutilation? Why don't you make it about the real story, human mutilation?" I said, well, what do you know? And what he said to me was that in 1997, he was very much into UFOs, and he knew that there had been a lot of UFO sightings in the Brecon Beacon area in South Wales. So he put some notices up around the Brecon Beacon saying, "Have you seen any UFOs?" This guy rings him up, says, "I'd like to speak to you about your UFO appeal." So he meets up with him. This guy turns out to be from Special Forces, SAS, and he told him that his job was to cover up incidents of human mutilations that they'd found on Brecon Beacon. So basically his job was, he'd be in a helicopter, they'd get notice that there was a mutilated body found, the helicopter would come down, they'd seal off the area, and then the body would be shipped to an RAF base, probably end up in America somewhere, I would imagine. And this guy, this SAS guy, he said he was in a group called Group 58 Security. That was this secret group. And he basically told this guy, or he met him twice on 2 occasions, and he took some personal photographs, this SAS guy. So he had, I think it was a couple, a 20-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl who'd been mutilated. They had the classic mutilation signs, and he showed this guy the photographs. So he was very, very freaked out by this. So he thought, well, somebody has shown me photographs of a dead body, I need to report this to the police, because he didn't know what to believe. So he went to South Wales Police, and then he was interviewed by CID officers, and he was told to come back the following day. When he went back the following day, he was told that those CID officers were on holiday to come back in 5 weeks. He went back in 5 weeks, he's told they were on sick leave, so they were just palming him off. So they got his information. Now, allegedly what then happened was the SAS guy got a bollocking off his superiors, and it caused friction between the guy who contacted me and the SAS guy. But the SAS guy gave some of his information, and I know that he gave the photographs to Tony Dodd, author of, because Tony Dodd was probably one of the main researchers in the UK on the subject. Now, I've tried to get, well, firstly, the guy who contacted me, I've tried to get him to go on camera about 3 times, and he's agreed to an interview, and then he's lost his bottle at the last minute each time. I even went all the way down to Wales to interview him, and then he lost his bottle again. You know, that was a wasted journey. So, but Tony Dodd had these images of these mutilated bodies from Brecon Beacon, but we contacted his wife, and she said that she threw all of his research material out when he died. So it was like, you know, we really wanted to get those images. Anyway, so, you know, that's pretty scary stuff, and possibly points to why there is a cover-up over this particular issue. And I'm going to present quite a lot of evidence that A, the government know all about this, and B, that they're trying to hide it from us. Now, the only actual statement from government that we know of ever on this subject was in 1998, because BBC Manchester were doing a piece on it, and so therefore, you know, BBC Manchester got in touch with the government, and they've obviously thought, well, we've got to say something if the BBC were involved. And all they said was, the series of animal mutilations have been very distressing for the farmers involved, and the majority of these incidents have been reported to the police as very serious offences and are being dealt with them at present. As a result, it is not for the Ministry of Agriculture to pass comment on these incidents, as they are being handled by the relevant authorities. Now, after that point in time, there's been both media blackout and government blackout. No one's ever spoken about it publicly. But the incidents have continued right through, you know, from the 90s onwards to now. They're still happening now. And I mentioned Professor Tony Fremont, the pathologist that was helping these three guys who were doing the research. And he received letters from a chap called Kevin McClure. Now, I don't want to go into ufology too much, but there's a guy in ufology called Andy Roberts. Now, Andy Roberts basically is a UFO skeptic, and he writes books about, he basically tries to debunk what I would consider very tight, watertight UFO cases, and I believe that he's steered somehow by the intelligence agencies to do this, that he's actually, that's a job, although I can't prove that. Now, a very close friend of his is Kevin McClure, and he wrote this letter, he wrote 2 letters to Tony Fremont, basically trying to scare him off to stop doing this research for the APFU. And he says here that I would be grateful to know whether the University of Manchester is aware that your work is being used to argue for the reality of extraterrestrial intelligent entities which abduct animals, mutilate them, then return them to the fields where they were found. And then he goes on basically point after point trying to scare Fremont off from doing this research. Because obviously this is what perturbs the authorities, that if they've got a pathologist on their side, without him, you know, the group can just be passed off as a bunch of quacks. So this is why I don't believe that letter was just from, you know, Kevin McClure, a member of the public. I think he's been put up to write that letter. Okay, and David Caton, in order to, because it's quite difficult to find new cases of these animals, so David Caton used to advertise in the farming media, and he'd put adverts listing the injuries. Has anyone seen animals with these particular injuries? And he got a phone call from a woman from the Ministry of Agriculture saying, Mr. Caton, you have no right to perform unofficial scientific experiments on animals that don't belong to you, etc., etc., etc. And David Caton countered that by saying, well, if a farmer owns an animal and it dies in suspicious circumstances, then it's up to him what he does with it and tries to find out what's going on. So there was a bit of a tit for tat there. Now, there was a case in Northampton, I think this was in 97 or 98, where a farmer discovered 2 of his sheep mutilated. They had rectal cores. I'm not sure what other injuries, but he was very bothered by it. So he put the 2 sheep in the shed. He then went away on business. The following day, 2 guys in suits came to his farm, and they said to the farmhand, right, we've come to take the sheep away. So the farmhand thought that the farmer had arranged this. So he let them, and apparently they put these 2 sheep, these mutilated sheep, into the back of a BMW, and off they went. The farmer came back to the farm and said, where's the sheep? And the farmhand, he said, well, the Ministry of Agriculture have taken them away, I thought, at your request. He says, no, I didn't. And there was only 4 people who knew about those sheep. The farmer, the farmer's wife, the farmhand, and the gamekeeper. Nobody else knew. So those government officials knew that those sheep had been mutilated to take them away. They hadn't told anyone. So it just so happened that the gamekeeper, his brother, is a chief inspector. So he got his brother, he says, well, why don't you get your brother to ring the Ministry of Agriculture and try and get these sheep back. So he rang them. Initially, they denied all knowledge of it. And then he said, well, okay, as far as I'm concerned, this is a criminal case because your government officials have stolen this farmer's sheep, and I'm prepared to take this to court if you don't return those sheep. So then someone else came on the phone and said to him, if you pursue this case as a criminal case, you will be hearing from your superiors. And that's what happened. So someone in the Ministry of Agriculture had the power to get a chief inspector warned off the case by his superiors. And there was another case several months after that case where a guy had 3 horses. One of them disappeared completely. The other one had the classic mutilation signs. I think it had a jaw strip and a rectal core. So he rang the vet, because the third horse that survived was like completely spooked. It was stressed. So he rang the vet, but the vet didn't come out. 2 officials from the Ministry of Agriculture came out, a man and a woman, with a big van, and they started winching up the dead horse into the back of the van. He says, well, what are you doing with my horse? You haven't even examined it to see what's happened. And apparently the woman said, this has nothing to do with you, it's government business. You will be compensated. And then, and this is the bit that intrigues me, she went on to say, I've got it written down here, to this farmer he said, well, I'm going to write to the Prime Minister about this. And apparently she said to him, that will do you no good whatsoever. And then she said to him that the Ministry of Agriculture have got operatives in every department in the country, in health and safety positions, and other positions in the councils, unknown to the councils who they are. So every council has got a plant, someone with a dual secret role in there, keeping their eye out for mutilation incidents, tip-off MAF, or DEFRA as it's now called, so that they can then come and cover it up. And they're probably getting big fat second salaries to operate as agents within our local authorities. Okay. And there's a guy called Sean Limbert who worked with David Payton quite a lot. He, after basically those 2 cases, he started badgering DEFRA with letters, and he got absolutely nowhere. They would deny that they'd received the letters, etc., etc. And as I mentioned before, that photograph of the sheep with its jaw strip, Mike Freebury's 4-year Freedom of Information request battle. And another case which happened with Mike Freebury, where he had a mutilated sheep in his car, and he wanted to get a post-mortem done, and he paid for a vet to do a post-mortem on this sheep. Didn't tell anyone. And then basically what happened was they telephoned the vet to ask about the sheep, and he couldn't understand how they'd got his. He couldn't understand how they'd managed to find the identity of the vet, and the only thing he could come up with is that they must have accessed his mobile phone records because he telephoned this vet, so they were surveilling him presumably. Now this advert, I put this advert in the Farmer's Guardian last year, because we were looking for fresh cases, because there's certain specific tests that we actually want to do. And I got a call from my local council, from the animal welfare officer, just basically saying to me, look, I'm just trying to keep you on the right side of the law, Richard. You do realise it's illegal to remove animal parts from farms and all the rest of it. So he was kind of warning me. Now what about, that's evidence of a government cover-up. What about evidence of a media cover-up? Because in our world, if the government start doing misdemeanours and things they shouldn't, it should be up to the media to expose that. But as we know, the two are colluded. Now, when David Caton put one of those adverts in the farming media, one of the journalists at the Farmers Weekly picked up on it and he said, oh, that sounds amazing. Well, not amazing, but fascinating. I'll write an article about it. So he wrote an article all about the animal mutilation phenomenon, and then the editor of the Farmers Weekly said, no, you're not going to publish that. And here's the letter. It certainly makes disturbing reading, but I feel this is a little too sensational for our readers. If definite proof can be found, we would certainly be interested in running something, but I guess that's some way off. Now, in 2003, a BBC producer came to David Caton's house, and David Caton is probably the guy who's got most of the evidence. He's got hundreds of photographs of mutilated animals. That's where most of my information has come from. So this BBC producer was very interested in it, and he's actually written a BBC proposal to make a 1-hour documentary about the phenomenon. This was in 2003. I'll just read a bit from it. It says, in the farming world, finding dead livestock, particularly sheep, is a common enough occurrence. But in the last few years, a macabre trend has begun to emerge. Farmers are reporting the discovery of dead sheep, cattle, and other animals with very strange injuries. And he finishes this proposal with no obvious explanation, some people claim alien abduction. Evidence to back up this theory includes heat damage at the edges of flesh cuts, suggesting lasers, and injuries to animals caused by being dropped from a great height. But in my opinion, the best approach for this film would be an evidential one to look at various cases and rule various theories out. The suggestion that explanations could be extraterrestrial would therefore be implicit. So the BBC proposed making a documentary where they were going to imply that this phenomenon was possibly extraterrestrial. But the senior producer knocked it back. Okay? So it went to the senior producer, and then who knows where it went after that. But they said, nah, we're not making a documentary about that. Okay. And like I said, there's been nothing, not a jot in the newspapers until very recently, and I'll come on to that. But since '98, nothing in the newspapers. And last year I sent copies of my film to the press, but they didn't want to cover it. And just to come on to my campaign, because I've really only been involved in this for just over a year, and after I made the film, I thought, well, I'll pursue this with the Department of Agriculture and see if I can bring it to their attention, see if I can get a spokesperson from there to be interviewed and comment on it. And, I came up with a brick wall, basically. In May 2009, I telephoned DEFRA, I sent them emails, and they just basically passed me around in a circle. I produced the film, that came out on the 18th of May 2009. But then I wrote to DEFRA again on the 8th of July. I basically got a holding letter on the 16th of July, and then I still hadn't heard anything from them. And in my correspondence, I listed all the evidence, pointed them to my website, etc., asked if they would make a comment on it, and it was just silence. So I thought, well, I'll go to my MP, see if I can, stir some shit up. So I gave my MP a copy of my documentary, and he was sort of, wow, this is pretty, interesting stuff. So he wrote a letter to the Secretary of State for Agriculture, Hilary Benn, saying that he'd seen my film and that he was disturbed by it, and could he answer my concerns. Hilary Benn then got his junior minister, although he's the minister responsible for farm animals, Jim Fitzpatrick, to write me a letter. So that was 19th of October 2009, and I had to go to my MP to get the reply. So you can see how long it took from the 8th of May. And basically, he went on about animals and safety and stuff like that, but there was only one real relevant sentence in his letter, and it said, "My officials do not have any information on incidents of this kind." All the information I've just presented you. So I wrote him a letter back saying, either you're lying or your officials are lying to you, And so then what happened, my MP said, well, I'll give him personally a copy of your film, Richard. So in Parliament, my MP, he handed him the film. So I emailed Jim Fitzpatrick shortly after my MP hands him the film. I'm saying, what do you think of the film? Can you make a comment? No reply. So in March this year, I was in the process of writing a letter to this Jim Fitzpatrick to say, come on, I want you to comment on this film. You're the Agriculture Minister. And my MP said, well, I'll tell you what, Richard, why don't I ask a question in Parliament? I'll submit a parliamentary question so we can, get a proper reply. So my MP submits a parliamentary question saying, when does the Minister intend to reply to correspondence from Richard D. Hall of Blaydon on animal mutilation? Then on the 17th of March this year, DEFRA and its agency, Animal Health, received several items of correspondence from Mr. Hall, blah, blah, blah. I replied to my honourable friend on the 19th of October. So he's just referring me back to that one-line statement that I put up earlier. So my MP said, well, that's not good enough. I'll submit another parliamentary question. Because I'd since written further letters since then. He then denied receiving these letters. In his second reply, neither DEFRA nor its agency hold a record of having received correspondence on the dates, right? Okay, then, right, and this is the intriguing bit. So after the second parliamentary question, 12 days later, now remember, no news media had ever covered this subject. for at least the last 12 years. Right? Bang. 12 days later, the Daily Telegraph and the Sun produce full-page articles on the phenomenon. So this is 12 days after my MP second question, and there it is in all its glory. Bars attack, typical Sun shit, right? Sorry. Daily Telegraph, a little more conservative, as you would expect, but still, you know, they actually got the information for this from Phil Hoyle, who's a member of the Animal Pathology Field Unit. And if you go on my website, you can actually read the document that Phil Hoyle gave them that they've based these articles on. So put the two side by side. They've just taken out all of the important bits. And there's a photograph you can't see on there that they used in the Sun, and it was of an animal that had been killed through natural predation. It wasn't one of the hundreds of photographs that David Caton could have given them. Do you know what I mean? So they haven't presented the story correctly with all of the evidence. But I believe that possibly, and I've got no proof that this is the case, that, you know, a minister's getting these questions, and he's probably saying to his officials, well, what do I say to this Hall guy? He's not going to go away. You know, how do I get rid of him? So possibly one technique would be, well, we'll put something in the media, and we'll debunk it in the media, and then at least we're not going to get accused of a cover-up. It's in the media, everyone knows about it, so they can then refer me to this. But I could be wrong there, but that's my feeling. Because once, you know, MPs sort of get the bit between their teeth, you know, then that's more than just a member of the public writing to a minister. And then I got a letter after that had been published saying you should bring this to the attention of the relevant authority, Animal Health or the police, and they will investigate. Right, okay, it's back to square one. So, anyway, let's just forget about the chocolate fireguard government for the moment, because they're a complete and utter waste of space. And let's look at the possible explanations for what's actually going on here. Now, we mentioned animal predation, and I completely rule that out because of all of the evidence I've already presented. A lot of people suggest satanic cults, and, you know, they do get up to some weird things. But I don't think that the evidence I've presented suggests satanic cults. I think that they don't leave evidence for what they're doing because, you know, they get arrested. No one's ever been caught. And some people say, well, it's a secret government project. It could be. I'm open to that idea, that it's perhaps a pharmaceutical company using these animals for some sort of secret research, the military maybe. Maybe they're sampling the environment or something like that. Quite possible, but I would refer you back to the covert nature of these attacks. If it is this, then they've got some damn sophisticated technology. And on balance, I would say they haven't got that technology. Okay? And we need to bear in mind that there may be more than one project. Okay? There might be people trying to copy what's going on. There might be more than one motive for these attacks. But I'm going to give you my preferred theory on what is going on. Okay? Now, this is, again, there's no proof of this, but this is because it explains all of the evidence, and I'll point out why. And that is that the animals are being used as incubators for antibodies or other biological agents. And this, for me, it explains all of the evidence, and I'll explain why. In 1899, a scientist called Metchnikoff, he took infected mouse cells from the lymph gland and he injected them into guinea pigs. The guinea pigs grew antibodies, and then he injected those antibodies back into the mice. So he cured the mice, so the mice weren't capable of growing those antibodies. So he used the guinea pig. So he used one species to create antibodies for another. And there are many, many cases in medical science of this. For example, you know, vaccines are we often use, like, you know, monkey's liver or kidneys to make vaccines with. It's amazing, but they do. The H1N1 vaccine is made inside a chicken's egg. So they're using the physiology of a chicken to make the thing that we need as a vaccine. And there's a thing called anti-thymocyte globulin, which is used in acute rejection of organ transplant, which is derived from horses or rabbits. So there are many cases where you can use one animal to grow something that another animal needs. And I think that's possibly what's happening in these cases. Now, I'm going to put it all together because how does this explain the jaw strip and the tongue removal? What I think is happening is they've got an animal that they want to grow something inside. They inject that animal with whatever agent it is, virus, whatever. They then tag that animal, because at some point in the future they then need to find that animal after it's grown the relevant antibodies. So they tag it, and they tag it in the jaw with an implant or in the ear. They then leave the thing. 3 months, 6 months. Later on, they then use the tracking device to find that animal. They then kill the animal. They then cut the tongue off, and then use the tissue of the tongue to test to see if it's got what they want. And then when you go to the doctors, the first thing they say is, put your tongue out, I want to see how well you are. So it's a means of testing. So they test the tongue, they say, yep, it's got what we want. They exsanguinate the blood and take the organs that they want. And the last thing they do before they leave, they strip the jaw off to remove the implant, or the ear, depending on whether the implant is in the jaw or the ear. It's because they don't want to leave any evidence of this advanced tracking device. And then they just leave the carcass there because they know no one will figure it out. Now, quite recently, 2009, David Caton, we were approached by this guy in the States called Chuck Zukowski, and he's come across 6 cases of cow mutilation in Colorado, and he's been testing them with one of these, tri-field EMF meter. And one of them, he's found residual electromagnetic field in the jaw, which had the jaw strip of one of these cows. So he believes there was an electromagnetic device, not on the other side, just on the side that's had the jaw strip. Okay? So he believes, because he was able to find this animal very soon after it was mutilated, although the device wasn't there, he believes that there was something in its jaw that was giving off electromagnetic waves. So, for me, we're trying to get funds to buy one of these things. There's a farm near me that had a classic mutilation case, 2 calves, and that guy's still got, bulls from that same herd. So I want to take this and go and test all of those animals to see if I can find an actual tracking device. That's part of the next phase, if you like. And if we can find that, then it would prove the theory. And it is just a theory. I'm not saying this is what's definitely happening. I'm saying it kind of explains the evidence. Now, I mentioned before that there were hotspots of animal mutilation activity, and one of them is an area west of Shrewsbury, Radnor Forest, and Phil Hoyle has spent many years. He actually, goes out at night and he sets his cameras up and he's filmed orbs in these locations making very, very strange movements, etc. And also he's found many, many mutilated sheep from farmers that basically, Phil went around over 100 farms giving them information packs, and then they would ring them up whenever they get a case. But what I find interesting is that it's near Brecon Beacon, where one of Tony Dodd's case of human mutilation was, and so the guy who rang me after the documentary. And then what I find even more intriguing, down here in the bottom left-hand corner is a place called St. Bride's Bay. And that bay is, there's been many, many cases of UFOs coming out of the water in St. Bride's Bay. Okay? But I'm not saying it's extraterrestrial. I'm presenting the evidence to you. And just bear in mind when you consider this evidence that when you remove the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Thank you.